And here we go. Morgan, it's Tuesday, and we have another guest live series. And I'm really excited for this one.
I'm so thrilled.
Do you know why?
Why is that, Nick?
There's certain people on LinkedIn that just go above and beyond. And it's not just because they're brilliant, but it's also because the way they choose to communicate and having such a strong point of view that really, almost like Seth Godin, it makes you want to change your mind because it just makes sense. Storytelling, epic hands, all the different things that make this person so great. Do you know who this is, Morgan? Do you have any guesses?
I don't know.
Could it be the great Nate Nasralla? And then who else could we have today?
I think we have a special guest named Kyle Asay from Qualtrics as well. Two masters of discovery. Please welcome them to the B2B Power Hour.
Yay! What's up?
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Good morning.
How's it going?
Good.
So guys, we have this tradition, and it's called the question of the day, and we love to go and throw it out to you guys. So it's something just to get to know our audience a little bit better, something not about work. So last week we had, what do you like better, dogs or cats? Morgan had another one not too long ago, is a hot dog a sandwich? Does anybody have a question of the day for the audience?
Something fun, something lighthearted. Doesn't have to be too super serious.
So there's an actual answer to this one. And I'm bummed that I wasn't in the is a hot dog a sandwich competition. So there's a variant on this, which is a burrito a sandwich? And there was a court case in the state of New York that settled this. So there is a right and a wrong answer. So
is a burrito
that's right. Is a burrito a sandwich?
Is a burrito a sandwich?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you guys have heard it here in the comments. Is a burrito a sandwich? I'll tell you that Nate will be. No one will be judging you. We're just warming up the comments. It's like when we go and do our sound check in the background, just making sure the comments work.
But just know that like an actual judge in a court of law ruled. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it.
Could you imagine being in that room? Like, seriously?
Oh, God.
I've never wanted to be a judge until now. Make decisions like that? Are you kidding me?
Right?
I don't.
We've got some definitive no's. Okay.
Yeah.
Burritos are sandwiches. Yes, no, heck no.
Heck no.
Absolutely.
I think people were actually Googling it. That's what was like the delay.
Yep. No. It feels like if this was to be ruled by a jury, the verdict would be no. So you just let me know when you want me to weigh in with the answer.
I'm ready because I just want to discuss the answer, honestly.
You want to go around and go and get the guesses of everyone? Or do you want to just jump right in, Morgan?
I mean, I would say a burrito is probably a sandwich. Just I'm thinking of what a judge would say. I could see it being a sandwich. I don't think it's a sandwich, but it could be.
That's a cop-out answer. That's not an answer.
That sounds like a marketing answer.
It's true. It depends.
Yeah, I'm gonna say yes. It's a sandwich. You've got substance between layers of a bread-like substance. As a wannabe judge, I'm gonna say it's a sandwich.
All right. What do you think, Nick?
I agree with that. His technical, how Kyle went through it. It was like, yeah, it's got something between kind of bread. So,
all right,
I'm gonna weigh in yes.
Well, according to an official court of law in the state of New York, a burrito is a sandwich. So, Jeff, Jasmine, Mike M, and Kyle, based on your logic, you were correct. I wholly disagree with this, by the way. But the whole case came up because there was a Qdoba that was trying to move into the same food court as a Panera. And Panera had a contract that said, we are the only sandwich shop that can be here. They said, therefore, Qdoba can't do business here. So they took him to court, and the judge ruled, hey, sorry, burritos are sandwiches. You can't join this food court.
Goodness.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
Well, all I heard, Nate, is that I'm right. So we'll just go with that.
Correct. That's the important thing.
Kyle got happy ears.
Yeah. Goodness.
There you go. Judge Kyle, as Thomas says.
Yep. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this morning to learn more about the court of law in New York and its relevance to the state of whether burritos are sandwiches. I am excited, thrilled for this conversation, and I'm sure everybody here who's joining us live is as well, because y'all, I don't say this lightly. It may sound light, but like, y'all know your stuff. And I think that's why I'm super excited for today's conversation, because there's so much of your content, each of your content, and then also what you do in your day to day has such relevance for how sellers do discovery. And I'm so glad we get to sit down for the next power hour to talk with you all. So if this is your first time around here in chat, I mean, we want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments. Like, this is your hour as much as ours. We've got questions. We have probably an inexhaustible list of them, but we also want to hear from you as we go through today's conversation. So Nick, where do you want to get started?
The one thing that really impresses me with both of you guys is that most people jump right into tactics. And the one thing that you keep reminding me about is it's the mindset of the seller that changes the questions. And so I think that comes down to preparation for the call. So maybe let's start there. How do we actually prep for a discovery call so that it gets the most value possible?
Yeah. Whenever I'm thinking about prep for any call, is how am I going to make this valuable for the buyer? I don't think very many buyers look forward to sales calls, especially not discoveries, because they're expecting to be grilled for a half hour, learn very little, and hearing questions that they answer all the time. And so, one piece of advice that I give my group is when you're preparing for a call, yeah, find the relevant questions to ask. Make sure you can go get an understanding of the buyer, but also make sure that you go in ready to teach the buyer something. My recommendation, especially for newer reps that aren't familiar yet with the industry they're selling into, spend as much time researching what you can teach your buyer as you do planning the questions. That will allow you to add a value, differentiate by how you sell, not just by what you sell, and be a, a pleasant surprise to a buyer that is used to just answering questions for a half hour.
I agree. And I would add on that to say that oftentimes a first discovery call is preparation for future discovery calls, especially because today's topic is in the context of an enterprise deal. And discovery is not like a single stage or a particular conversation that you are done with and you check off. And so to build on Kyle's thought, the way that I think about preparation is first up front through research, you're preparing, in Kyle's words, some type of point of view, a hypothesis on, okay, this is how we can help. This is how we can add value to the account. And then you're beginning to validate, change, build on that in those first conversations as the process continues. And so preparation isn't only account research and what you want to teach them, it's ongoing, it continues. So I would say you never really finish your preparation because you're continuing to learn. Just as you're helping your buyers learn, to Kyle's point, you are continuing to learn and validate and develop that point of view in an ongoing way.
Majaz just threw in chat what I was going to follow up to Kyle with, which is like, what are you looking for when you're doing preparation? Because if I'm a seller and I'm spending as much time preparing for the call as I am developing questions, what are the pieces of insight or information that I'm looking for in that time? Like, what should I be paying attention to?
Yeah. So I like to break it into 3 different buckets. There is the persona understanding, the industry understanding, and then our solution understanding. And so for persona understanding, I'm going to go look at job descriptions of that role, either at their company or similar companies. That gives me insight into what tools they're using, what they might be dealing with, the problems they might be solving. And then that gives me a better understanding of areas that would be relevant to teach them, right? If I see somebody, if it's a VP of sales and they have Clary as a tool to use, I know forecast is top of mind. I want to go find something interesting about forecasting. That gives me a topic. Then for industry, I'm going to go look for relevant challenges in the industry that tie back to what they care about. So this might be Googling something like challenges with forecasting in the tech space to go get more of a point of view that's industry specific. And then finally, if I can tie it back to the solution that I'm selling, I can look back at customer stories. I can look at proof points. I can look at internal research for something that is relevant to teach that ties back to their industry, their persona, and ideally our solution.
Right on. So I love the framework. The way I would talk to my teams about it is very similar: contact, company, competitive landscape / industry. And you have to go through all three levels, especially when you may be starting a conversation with somebody who is more at a manager level and you're working up to an executive level, or vice versa. You're starting at an executive level, gaining sponsorship and going back down. You have to be able to kind of navigate those different layers or levels very easily. And one specific thing that I'm always trying to listen for, and if anybody's kind of read or listened to me recently, I've been using this phrase, which is trigger phrase. And it's an internal kind of shorthand that executives will use to talk about a priority that's deeply important to them. And a kind of a recent example, I was talking with the former CEO of SendGrid, Jim Franklin, and his thing was make the mail move. Everything in the entire company, in order to get ahead of competition, stay relevant, and every contact in this company was making the mail move. New product features, deliverability, user acquisition, it all came back to that. So if you can start a conversation and say, hey, I have a couple ideas for how we could make the mail move at SendGrid. I'd love to talk through that. That's like exactly what they heard in the last conversation at the last all hands. They heard it like 50 times, and they're going to go walk into their one-on-one and they're going to hear it again. And they're like, what? You know what I mean? They're like, okay, I'm in it, because clearly this person understands what is important to the entire company and to my job personally.
The first thing that jumps in my mind as you guys are both going through this was, how critical is it for SDRs and AEs to be talking through this process? Because what you guys go through is what me and Morgan do for prospecting. Mm-hmm. And could you imagine how painful of a process that would be to go and have all this prospecting go through that? You go and set up the meeting and then they ask the same questions and nobody looks through their notes.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to Nate's point of how discovery is ongoing. Prospecting can be part of discovery. You can go talk to somebody that has no influence on a decision to buy your product, but they might teach you a trigger phrase. So that was a question that came to the chat. Where do you uncover trigger phrases? Prospecting is often a great place to find it. I remember as an AE, I was trying to break into an account. I was having no luck. I was talking to a lot of people, getting nowhere. But I was able to go through and I was able to pull out trigger phrases from those conversations. And so I literally sent an email to the CEO. Said, hey, I heard that your goal is to have your NPS at this number by this year. I put together my hypothesis of how we can help you with that. And he responded immediately. And so if you're not talking with your SDR, if you're not treating prospecting like part of discovery, you might uncover trigger phrases that, I love that, Nate. I love that. You might uncover those and never use them. If you're uncovering them, use them, deepen the discovery, and now you're progressing the account even without a formal discovery call.
And Kyle, I love that you just touched on this. What you did is you took those inputs and you wrote them down and shared them. And that is where I think there's a huge miss in discovery, is oftentimes it's all conversational. And there's a huge advantage to taking what you're uncovering, maybe through prospecting and what your SDR is finding, putting them down on paper, putting them in front of somebody and allowing them to react. Like in the example of the CEO, it was like, Kyle, we got to talk, because this just like hit the nail on the head. And what I find is when people see something written down and you're asking for them to either correct or confirm what's there, they're willing to go into far deeper context. And so at the start of every conversation, if there is some type of handoff, I like for there to be some documentation carrying the conversation through. And it just sets up a really productive way to continue unpacked and to find that person's point of view. And again, it's great either way. Are they confirming or correcting what you found so far?
If you'll indulge me for a second, I hear some chatter in the comments, but basically, if discovery is continuous and it can be layered inside of prospecting, how do you both think about, on an outbound motion into a company, creating this research or creating these conversations? And this is somewhat like routing into an account, but I don't think it's just that. So when you're considering or thinking about getting into a company, how much research are you doing sort of asynchronously about the term, kind of out in the world? And then how much time are you spending finding different stakeholders, finding different people as a part of the company and learning from them to help inform either moving up the ladder or moving back down the ladder, depending upon how you run your enterprise motion.
So I'll start there. There are a couple different ways to think about it. So first, you can spin your wheels all day long, continuing to build out the perfect account map and so on, and it's never going to be correct until you have some conversations. So I like to do just enough account research to figure out what am I going to say, inform, or bring to this account that would be totally weird to bring to another account because it's that unique. And at that point, I know that I've done enough to start having some conversations. And then what I'm trying to do is have conversations around a couple different points in the organization so that I can begin to triangulate kind of the real story of what's going on, especially if your product is such that you will need a couple different business units or types of people in the deal. Then don't have a single point of entry. Start in more of a star pattern or a couple different places. So those would be kind of my first two ways to begin to break in or to start the discovery process.
The best reps are just wanting to have conversations, not because it's part of the sales process, but because they're actually curious to better understand the company. I think a big mistake that reps make is they assume that the first person they talk to at an account, that is now their contact for a deal. They are now going to take this person through discovery, a demo, send a proposal. Really good reps know, look, like the chance that the first one or two people I talk to are actually going to be my main contacts for an enterprise deal, it's so slim. But I am so happy to talk to them. I'll talk to anybody, even if they're not part of the decision process, because I can go learn more about systems being used, problems the company has, goals that they have. So when I do finally get in front of the right committee, I have a much broader point of view of the account. And so I would say, look, like, understand the account. To Nate's point, we'll have to begin having conversations, then have as many conversations as you can until your point of view is specific enough and defensible enough to go present your solution to somebody that actually can make a decision.
And I'll add one follow-up there because Kyle brought up this topic of committees, and it's so good because this is the marker and the topic for the day. I'll come back to what makes enterprise discovery different from just traditional discovery. It's that the most meaningful discovery questions always require a multi-threaded response. And that multi-threading can happen by one, asking very thought-provoking questions that a single contact can't answer without going to talk to other people. And it can be you, to your earlier point, Kyle, that a lot of people believe that this one contact is the one that is, I'm limited to, but that's not the case. You can also begin multi-threading across the different roles. So you can't leave that out when you're talking about enterprise discovery specifically. You will have to go deeper and deeper into different point of views across the whole committee.
I just have to note Nate's active listening skills are like off the chart. No, but honestly, like it's just something that I don't think in sales we take into consideration until we have to, or where we have Gong and now we're listening to our our game tape and looking back like, oh, I didn't actually answer the question, or I didn't actually listen to the words they used to actually answer the question in the way that the context that they said it. And so, Nate, I have to give you credit because you do a really, really good job of this. You can't help but feel listened to.
Well, thanks. And let me maybe unpack that for a quick second. You guys are probably wanting to jump to another topic and keep this moving. But my quick thought on that is that at the end of the day, people don't do what they don't want to do. The best thing that you can do through discovery then is to help them form their own conclusions. And the way that you can do that is by pulling out different points that were referenced or mentioned earlier in the conversation and ask a question like, hey, so when I heard you say this, what did you mean by that? Or how did that connect to this thought? And you're helping them kind of weave this tapestry of bringing all of their different thoughts together that they may not have synthesized outside of your conversation before. So the more you can listen, the more you can help them come to their own conclusion, form the point of view. It's going to be far more strong, compelling, lasting than anything that you are trying to convince them of.
It ties back to Kyle's point is great sellers are curious. And so the best way to be curious is to listen for something that you need clarification, even if it's just to help them clarify.
There you go. Now you're doing it. You nailed it.
I'm learning. Morgan, I'm learning.
So it's actually interesting. I think there's two things that are on my mind at this point. One is, you're talking to somebody inside of a company and you've done some of this prep work. How do you create a flow for that meeting? I know agendas for discovery get tossed around a lot, and I think, Kyle, this might be a passion project of yours, where we went through for our own personal reasons, and then also for another Power Hour show with the Beam team, we went through some discovery processes of ours, sort of doing a test drive of other companies. And I will say a lot of them look and sound very similar. So how do you effectively set the topics and then maybe the flow for that meeting?
Yeah, this is a little passion project of mine, because I'm gravitating more and more into how people in sales need to be different than other sellers. We assume going into a discovery call that our buyer is going to sit back and let us ask them questions for a half hour. They'll answer because they want to be there. They really are making a decision in the first few minutes if they're going to answer and be engaged, or if they're going to give you just short check the box answers, get off the call, and never talk to you again. And so an agenda is your first chance to really differentiate. And the agenda needs to be what they are going to get out of the call. Discovery is not supposed to be a selfish act for the seller. They're not doing you a favor. They're not going to help you out. They are there only to find out as quickly as possible if you can help them. If you can't help them, they don't want to talk to you, right? And so the objective for the call, I want to make sure the buyer knows right from the beginning, hey, by the end of this call, I'm going to tell you explicitly how I can help you, how I think I can help you. Then it's your decision if you'd like to go further and allow me to try to prove that I'm accurate. Now the objective set lets them know what they get out of it. Now I need to set the flow. Before I can tell you exactly how we can help you, I need to better understand a couple elements of your role as they relate to, and then I'll break down one or two parts of their role that tie back to my solution that I need to better understand. So when I start the call, I have my hypothesis of value, how I think I can help them. If I don't have that, I shouldn't even ask for the meeting. Like, that's really bad selling to ask for a meeting. You don't at least have an idea of how you might be able to help. I'm going to tell them the hypothesis. I'm going to tell them what I need to understand from them to validate my hypothesis. That allows me to do discovery. And then by the end of the call, my value hypothesis has evolved into a value proposition that is more defensible. And then we can carry the conversation forward with them and other stakeholders.
If you're a fan of Sandler, you're going to recognize a lot of what Kyle's saying in the upfront contract idea. And if you're signaling to a buyer what they're going to get out of it, an outcome, they're going to agree to that contract, because to Kyle's point, it's like, what's in it for them? That's the thing that they care about. And where this goes wrong is when you begin to flip it and believe that this is a time for you to pepper questions to qualify and get information for yourself, as opposed to discovery is like one of the best services, when done right, that you could ever do for a buyer, because you're creating space for them to think more deeply and critically about a meaningful problem than they probably have had the space before. I mean, if you just think about like your own day, when you're going through, your calendar, you're looking at all the things that you got to get done. You wake up thinking about your to-do list, your email inbox is flooded, Slack is blowing up. You're not like pausing to think about, well, what's really going on below the surface here? Like, is this really the root of my problem? And to Kyle's point, if you want to conduct a very good demo that is concise, specific to what the buyer needs, different from any other seller, then you have to help unpack and uncover the root of the issue before you jump into it. And so that's where, man, discovery should be such a fun, enjoyable process for buyers, because they leave with a new thought, a new point of view, and hope that a problem can be solved than before, or just, hey, direction of like, okay, this is a dead end. This is clearly not a fit. And the best thing that you can do is figure that out, quickly. But in either way, I just come back to this idea. If Kyle, your big point is you have to be different from everybody else. I think my point of the day is discovery is a gift that you can package up and deliver to a buyer.
There's a question I think we should answer in the chat. What does an effective hypothesis look like versus a poorly constructed one, right?
Great question.
So let's, I always like to use Clary as an example for these hypotheticals because most of us understand forecasting and sales, and most of us are familiar with Clary. So if I'm selling Clary to a VP of sales, a poor hypothesis would be, hey, VP, I think we can help you improve your forecasting. I want to understand how you forecast, right? That is too vague, too generic, and it's not leading us down a specific path for discovery to better understand current process, current problems. A better hypothesis is I believe that we can help increase your win rate by surfacing deals that may have otherwise gone unnoticed, while also helping you better call your number at the region, team, and individual level. Before we get to that point, I need to better understand how you are currently identifying deals that warrant deeper attention and how you are currently forecasting at the region, team, and individual level. It's more specific, it's tied to value, not just generic fluff like, hey, better forecasting. And it gives reasons for why I'm now going to ask deep questions about their process that otherwise you might be thinking, well, I don't want to answer all these questions because we're just going to end the call with you asking for more of my time.
That's right. And the one thing that I would add is oftentimes you're building a hypothesis around some type of like high level executive metric. And in any type of high level metric, revenue or net revenue retention or cost to acquire a customer, something like that, there are a ton of different inputs that roll up. So whenever somebody is making a decision, there are a ton of different paths that they could choose in order to affect that one output or that high level goal. And so your hypothesis has to build in some type of specific approach that you can either confirm or invalidate. So for example, if you wanted to increase your NRR or net revenue retention, then your approach may say something like, we need to identify and surface problem customers before they spiral out of control. Could be totally different. Like we need to identify the most engaged accounts with the highest upsell opportunity to focus more AM time there. Two totally different paths. And that's what you're trying to find, because obviously your product will enable one of those approaches and you have to figure out, okay, is this truly the thing that's going to move the needle on that metric or that top level goal that the executive, that the team cares about?
Do you mind if I throw in a quick story?
Do it.
So people laugh about that. I hated English. And high school, it was a big struggle to get through English because it just didn't seem relevant what we were doing. But then I had this teacher, ironically named Mrs. English, that gave me agendas that got me excited, which was a mind-blowing idea of like, how do you give a homework assignment that gets you excited? But she used to write them in a way that it actually added context to where I wanted to go. So she made me see the future in the project in front of me. And so when she first started doing it, it was really generic and it was just an assignment. But then she started adding in layers the more she got to know me, that it made me see how the project was of real value and it got me excited to do it. But it also opened up questions for me and clarification. So I was like, okay, do I actually understand what's being asked of me? Are we going on the same journey together, or are we going in different paths? And it added so much meaning to my homework that I was actually excited to go and do it. But it was the first time that I'd ever actually even asked questions about an agenda, or like started to visualize where it changed the whole game. And that's how I look at discovery, is those agendas, is from that experience in life, because it was such a game changer for me that the agenda was actually meaningful.
So I love the language that you're using around journey, because and I was writing about this morning, every single buyer is on a journey and they are starting where they are at today, some type of problem that is costing them something, and they're trying to get to some destination of payoff where they want to be tomorrow, their future state. And the more that you can, one, understand where they're at today, two, clarify where they're trying to go, and then three, the process in between, how you're going to move them forward, that's the service that you're doing as the seller to the buyer throughout discovery. So I love the language of the metaphor that you're using and you're bringing up around this idea of journeys, because when you do that, and going back to Kyle's point around outcomes over agendas, if you can understand where they're going, you can use that framework to figure out kind of your path along the way. You don't have to stick to a rigid script of, well, I just asked question 2, therefore I go to 2B, and then if 3C. Okay. So I appreciate you bringing in the journey language, Nick. Great story.
There's a first of all, Michael had commented a little bit ago, knowledge nugget tsunami, which is perhaps my favorite comment of all time. Couldn't agree more, Michael, and everybody else who's joining us. One thing that I have a question for both of you, honestly, is we've gotten to like establishing the flow, and I think one thing talking with a lot of enterprise sellers that we work with and we talk to is there's sort of I think it's I don't know, I can't speak English right now, so I think there's maybe a lack of confidence or competence or skill training in sort of balancing asking questions and teaching the customer, because we've sort of brought up this idea we have insights to deliver. We want them to see maybe something different about our company as in a part or process of discovery with us. But we also need to continue to uncover and make sure that they're the right fit or that it's the right time, and that we can leverage those questions to also illuminate things. So how do you think about balancing continuing to go down the journey of asking more questions to uncover more or learn more about the account, and also insert some of your own or some of the company's insights about those problems that they're experiencing? And I know it's a dance, so I'm not looking for a y equals mx plus b sort of formula here for sellers to use.
Yeah, I can start. It is the balance. So first off, when they understand why you're asking questions, that already helps have the right like attitude on the call, for lack of a better word. My favorite cheat phrase when I want to add some value while extracting value is just a simple phrase. The reason why I ask is. So if I'm going back to the Clary example and I want to ask a question, like I would love to understand how you currently decide which deals you should personally review as the VP of sales. Here's my question. I want to understand process. The reason why I ask that is we work with a lot of companies that only do it off of deal size. What they have found is that it makes them miss some significant size deals that are actually more winnable than their largest, that never get the attention they deserve because they have no way to flag it. So I'm curious how you're currently finding those deals to identify.
So you have to continue to earn the right to ask more questions. And in Kyle's example, one way that you can earn the right is by explaining why it's helpful for the buyer, like the reason I ask, I'm asking because. The other way that you can do that is begin to teach them or create more of an open mind, because you are sharing stories of what other customers are doing. It's like, hey, most of the hiring managers that we're working with, even though they're gold on top of funnel applications, they're realizing like, oh, this is actually the wrong focus because we have a bottom of funnel issue on time to hire. We need to focus on that first. Is that a conversation you all are having? How does that compare to your goals right now? And so you've set up that question by making them think of like, why am I doing all this work to find more and source more candidates when they're not moving anywhere? And they're like, yeah, that's right. And then they'll kind of unpack some of those internal conversations. So it's a teeter-totter or a seesaw that you were on as a kid. If the balance gets too far out of I'm feeling interrogated, you need to put some more weight back onto the teaching moment and bring it back into balance. And then you can ask another question.
I love the seesaw analogy. That's great.
I like visuals. Always helpful.
Makes me think about, Nate, you had previously said about when you think you're done discovery is usually the sign that you need to do more. And I think this is kind of one of those good moments to dive into that, because you're saying you got to balance it, but at the same time, when you think you're done, you're probably not. And so maybe tell us a little, how did you come to that conclusion?
So it's this idea that it's not a stage in a pipeline discovery. It's a continual discipline throughout the entire sales cycle, because you are always going to have new, and again, in the context of an enterprise deal, you're always going to have new contacts and new stakeholders coming into the deal all the way down through the last minute. And so think about like you're going back and forth on red lines in a contract and you're getting into this death spiral. It's like, why is this happening? Was there a similar contract in the past where things went really poorly? I'll give you a very specific example of this. So we were building into a large deal, some custom content that we were going to create for a top 5 cable company. And their lawyers were getting very, very specific about copyright, about the content that we were writing and we're going to be delivering alongside the product. And in our mind, we were like, why? Well, one, you don't like own outright. This is things that we're creating and may want to resell or repurpose down the road. But why is this so important? Turns out that they had gotten into a years-long lawsuit over copywriting, and there was some like scar tissue built up around this. And so instead of going back to the legal team, it was by working with the champion that we actually understood that. She helped us she was one of the best champions that I ever worked with. She helped us come to some language with our legal team that she could go back to her team and say, hey, can we accelerate some of this? Here's the timeline that we're working on for this project. Can you approve this language, and does this work? And so when she basically helped to smooth over the deal, because we could understand, oh, got it, there's some history here that we didn't even see. And mind you, this was a deal that should have closed right at the end of Q3. This was Q3 2021, ended up closing the following January because of how long this redlining took. I did a poor job of figuring out, like, why is this taking so long? Because I didn't continue discovery all the way up until the point of signature, like the very finish line. So just an example to say it is definitely not a stage that stops at the top of the sales cycle, goes all the way down to the wire.
Kyle, anything you would like to add?
There's I'm not going to build on that because that was awesome. I do want to address this question though that just came through. An example from someone where a client came into a disco with a way of thinking throughout the conversation and changed. I'm going to give an example from a member of my team here at Qualtrics that just did this beautifully well. It was all the reps credit. So Brian, if you're listening, shout out to Brian. The client came in with a desire to do exit surveys for employees that leave, and they were insistent they would do it through phone interviews. At Qualtrics, we're a tech company. We don't really do a lot of phone interview type stuff. It's not super scalable, but that was one of their most rigid requirements. And we were the only vendor in the RFP that did not offer this service. What the rep did is he dug into why they wanted to do that. And their assumption was it would help them get more in-depth insights. So the outcome they wanted was better insights to understand why people were leaving. That would end up helping them reduce churn. His counter was, okay, what we're seeing right now in the space is people are very unlikely to complete in-depth interviews when they're leaving the company, especially one with high churn. Response rates are going to be extremely low. So what you're going to have is some in-depth insights from a very small population, which might lead you down a path of fixing problems that are very expensive that don't matter to that many people. And they're like, oh crap, yeah, that would be a disaster to go target a population. The most willing people to give in-depth feedback will have the strongest opinions, and we might go completely the wrong direction and hurt our company or waste money. So our proposition of, hey, what if we could get you almost as in-depth insights, improved analytics, and a much higher response rate, so you understand across the entire population what's actually happening. And so we went from being the vendor that should have not even been in the RFP because we did not offer the main required functionality or service, to winning the RFP because we changed the way they thought about exit interviews.
That's criteria. A great story. Great stories all around. One thing I hear that we haven't addressed yet is the fairly common situation in which the buying committee continues to grow and grow and grow. And I know Challenger customer, however many years ago, said on average it's like 5.4, and maybe there's data today to suggest it's a lot larger than that. So how, as a seller, we've sort of, to tie the threads together from routing into the accounts and learning more about the accounts as you're talking and doing discovery with more stakeholders, but then also thinking about discovery as a discipline and not just a stage in the pipeline. How do you think through sort of strategically doing discovery as the buying committee continues to grow and grow? I'll just leave it there and see what happens.
So Nate is world class at this. I'm going to have him answer, but I will let the team know that there is a definitive answer for how many decision makers get involved in a deal. It is always one more than you think it is, and they always surface at exactly the wrong time. That is guaranteed.
Yes, too many oftentimes. So the growing buying committee, in my experience, is a sign of dysfunction on the seller side, because what you haven't done is created enough structure or rigor in a decision framework to create confidence to move forward. So what ends up happening is buyers continue to kind of metastasize this committee, going out and pulling more people in. And it's this like collective disresponsibility. Well, like, I don't feel enough confidence to move forward and just execute on this yet. So let's get more opinions, more involvement, more people to own the potential for failure of the project. So it's a sign of high regret and low confidence in the buying process. And that's up to you as the seller to manage. So the flip side of how you begin to introduce this is you begin to ask questions like, hey, what needs to be true of this project for it to work? You're beginning to there's an exercise in decision-making science called the pre-mortem. You're putting the buyer into the future and you're looking back and saying, that was a total failure. Why did it go wrong? And you can audit and analyze and break all those things down, call it out into the open, increase the level of confidence. So the best thing that you can do is, number one, create more structure and rigor in the decision-making process to increase confidence. And two is help the champion assemble and clearly label roles on their committee. If there is no one person who at the end of the day is going to pick a direction amidst conflicting views, conflicting opinions, it's like the Andy Grove principle of disagree and commit. We're going to move forward anyway. Then the committee is just going to keep growing and likely end in no decision at all. For you, for a competitor, for anybody, the project is just going to blow up.
That is so good. I can't wait to like write that out and think it through. How the committee grows because of dysfunction on the buyer side. What that made me think of is that likely happens when, as a seller, we're constantly asking, well, what do you want the solution to look like? What is going to be like putting too much of the burden on them. And they're like, I don't know. What should the solution look like? I'm not an expert in this. Let's go get more people, more voices that also don't know what it looks like. And so that's why it's so important for the seller to have control of, okay, well, I know what the outcome should look like. I know what good looks like. I just need your help to make sure that we shape that outcome to fit your company and your processes. If you put too much burden on the buying team, they're going to expand, because then they have lots of scapegoats for a poor outcome. And to Nate's point, they end up not buying it all. Love that.
It makes me think even of like Blair Enns' rule that power in the sale is a relationship between desirability and desire, where if the buyer desires your solution more than you need to close them, you have power in the sale. And I wonder if some of that is a function of what we were just discussing, where if we can provide structure and clarity, we have not just the insights, but we're saying this is what we offer. And yeah, there's some room to like on the edges, on the margins, to adjust to your needs. But ultimately, we're coming here to solve this problem, and here's how we're going to do it. And however that gets navigated in the discovery boosts the desirability in the sale, where the buyer looks to you and says, what should we do? You should tell me, you should teach me in some ways. Not necessarily that every seller becomes, I don't know, the industry expert, but I imagine that lots of conversations would shift that way if we did that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to maybe use a bit of an analogy or a parallel here. So as a founder, I raise money for the company to keep us funding our products and things like that. And talking with a mentor who's giving me some advice on fundraising. And I was kind of asking about kind of ways to frame responses to questions and things like that. And his point was, first, recognize that any question following the story of the company and the pitch is a failure in the story in the first place. And his point was like, the only thing you should be hearing is, how do we move forward? What's next? You have to transfer desire over to that investor. And I was like, well, one, that sounds like really hard to just like end a story with a check. Like, that seems unreasonable. But I think the principle is very good, and it relates exactly to what you're saying, Morgan, around selling as a process of transferring desire. Like, you should be so convinced and excited to solve a problem for that buyer that they feel it. And immediately the level of desire in them increases, so that it's not objections that are following, but like, tell me more. What comes next? How do we do this?
Mm-hmm. Paul had asked in the chat, yes, this is always available as a recording at this event on LinkedIn after the fact, and also on the B2B Power Hour YouTube, just for anybody watching.
What do you guys think? Should we talk about red flags?
I was just going to mention
That's a great question, because That is a long list, but there's definitely a few critical ones. I'm sure we could go and cross off the list to make sure everybody's on top of it.
Mm-hmm. What are red flags you look for in enterprise deals?
Do we want to narrow the scope at all to what phase of the buyer journey they're in, like consideration or like final like contract review, or do we want to say broad red flags? I'm good either way.
Why don't we do it chronologically? Let's start. What do you think about starting at the beginning, and then we can kind of walk it through? So what would be, maybe Kyle, some of the very first red flags that you would look for?
Very first red flags. I would say that I'm talking to people and I don't understand what personally motivates them. I may have a really good company point of view, how I can make the company more successful, but the reality is very few people are compensated that closely to how the company does. And so I'm going to have a really hard time getting information and introductions to go wider and higher in the account if I don't have what personally motivates the initial people that I'm speaking to. So red flag number one for me early on is, hey, how do I help these individuals win?
I like it. I would say if the definition of a win for each individual is totally different from the other, that's going to be very hard to figure out how do we align these. So for example, if one person is gold based upon increasing the meetings booked from outbound, the other is driving inbound conversions. I'm just using an example to say those two things are completely different, two entirely different measures and workflows. How are you going to bring them together? Not that you can't, but it's going to be tough because you have people coming from totally different points of views with different incentives, different metrics, different bonus, promotion structures, so on. So you got to figure out and kind of think, very deeply, all right, how am I going to bridge the needs of so many different perspectives inside of one deal?
And then how can we tie those needs to things that actually impact the company? I see all the time where a seller thinks they uncovered a pain point at the individual level. It's often things like, I'm going to save them so much time, make their job easier. And so the gut check there is, well, how do we then transpose that to actually matter to the CFO, right? We just had this conversation this morning. Like, just because you're going to put out a fire doesn't mean you're putting out a fire that matters. Every company has fires. I'm stealing this from the Qualified Sales League by Don McMahon. Every company has lots of fires. We're never going to put them all out. So another red flag is, hey, are the only fires I have found fires that the company can ignore? Or are they ones that are actually problematic enough to solve? If not, I don't have a deal.
There's a good quote from Reid Hoffman, which is the same thing. Leadership is deciding which fires you're going to let burn, because you can't do them all. I would say a kind of related red flag is asking what is the most important priority in the company and getting different answers from different people. And that's a scary thing because you're like, where's true north here? What do I anchor to?
How about further on or maybe later in the deal stage? What you've done all this work, you think you're clear sailing, and then there's this ta-da red flag in the middle. What do those typically look like?
If you're in the middle and you don't know how they would use your solution if they bought it today, then they don't know either, and your deal's probably dead. And so if you're deep enough to have a point of view from different stakeholders, you're trying to present the solution, and you honestly, if you gave it to them for free today, how would they use it? If you can answer that question, then big red flag. You don't have a defensible solution to bring to them.
Related to the point around how would people use it, the people who will be using it haven't seen it or talked to you. Everything is funneling through one or a very few set of people. And especially when you're talking about end users who may be so deeply ingrained, if you're talking about some type of rip and replace approach specifically, huge red flag. That is going to be a big barrier.
And then at the end of the deal cycle, usually after pricing is proposed, and again, this is all discovery because we're still doing discovery at this stage, right? So we're not cheating the topic by any means. At the end of the deal cycle, the biggest red flag is you don't know exactly what the next 2 or 3 steps are into closure. Because if you as a seller don't know exactly what has to happen, your buyer has no idea either. And so that becomes them telling you they're working on it. They're working on nothing. And you're just asking follow-up questions, just checking in. If you don't know what happens next, they don't know. Nothing's happening. Your deal is stalled.
Yeah, very much related to that. I was talking with an investor named Brett Queener, and he used to run sales teams. And his question that I loved was, what happens to this company if they don't end up going through and buying? What happens to them? And if you can't clearly say by this date something horrible is going to happen to them, where's the urgency to actually close? So I after I heard that one, I started incorporating it, and I really like it. Like, what happens if they just back out right at point of contract?
Yeah, what's the cost of inaction in many ways? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's more important than ever right now, Nate. We're seeing across the industry so many deals that seem to be done getting blocked at contract signature because the CFO is saying, look, like, I get the business case, but if I don't make this purchase, if I don't spend this money as a company, we're going to survive. And right now there's a lot of big fires that actually threaten our chance to survive. So that is, if you're selling large enterprise type deals, if you can't answer that question, your buyer can't answer that question, their CFO is not going to approve the purchase.
Yeah, that's right. And if the CFO is looking at the deal for the very first time at the point of purchase, that's also a red flag. You need to be laying the groundwork much earlier. And I mean, your point is so good, because I would hazard a guess that is more commonplace than the exception.
Yeah. If the person that signs the contract is asking, what is this contract for, when you're expecting it to be executed, unless it's a $20K deal,
Yeah,
right.
You're done.
Right.
At best stalled.
I mean, we're laughing. It's really not funny, because it's a horrible place to be as a seller.
It's the worst. I'm laughing so I don't cry, Nate.
Right. We're perhaps laughing out of the familiarity. I love it. It was an anonymous comment, but I see Musk Twitter. Like, yeah, you can be right at the finish line and have something go south.
Exactly.
Yep.
Man, the other thing that actually came up, and I know we had talked about this a little bit before in prep for today, so I just wanted to bring this back, which is, we know from, I don't know, social psychology and a bunch of sales trainers, every seller is constructing a mental model of the account that they're working into. And basically, you could call it intuition. It's a mental model. It's just a way of us thinking about how the company works. So, Nate, you had sort of touched on this previously, but I didn't want to lose this thread, which is, how are you becoming confident in your mental model? I know that you had previously laid out some demarcation points, which is like, do I have a unique point of view that would be interesting to strike up a conversation? That's how I know my research phase is mostly done, and I need to jump in and actually talk to people. But as you continue to talk to people, how are you thinking about the company? Like, in some ways, I'm thinking tactical. Like, how are you bringing together all of this information? And as Nick often says, sales is a team sport. So maybe for both of you, how are teams bringing together this information so that there isn't one seller has one mental model of the way the company works, and then another person on the same team has a different model, and so they go different approaches instead of staying in lockstep?
So a couple different thoughts. One, the best mental model is always based on reality. So that's the whole point, is you start with something and you're consistently updating it as you learn, and you're trying to match what is in your head to the reality of the experience, lived experience of your buyers. And there are two different ways to think about the model. One is just how the business operates, and then two, how you will affect or impact the way that the business operates. So splitting those apart on that first one, the best thing that I would suggest anybody do is go look at a driver tree. And a driver tree links together all of the different metrics inside of a business in a causal relationship. So for example, if you're talking about leads generated, what are the inputs to generate those leads? Is it number of site visitors times conversion rate, right? You have to understand, how is the business actually operating for this person? So that's number one. Do you understand the reality of how the business works? The second one is then, how will you impact the business? And I actually posted a very simple visual for this morning, which is the journey framework. And it's, where is your buyer today? A problem. Where are they trying to go tomorrow? Some type of payoff or an outcome. And what's the path or the process that connects the two? And how are you going to move them along that? And that's where you can begin to then insert your hypothesis around, okay, this product moves them forward in this way, and we need to take them down this path. So two very basic ones. But I just come back to, the best mental model is never static. Discovery is the mechanism that updates it and helps you match it to reality along the way.
Kyle, did you have anything to add to that?
I love the format Nate just walked through. I would say that there's a lot of different ways you can think about it, both simple and complex. The main elements are you need to understand why, as a company, can they not keep doing what they're doing? How is our solution going to improve upon that? How does that tie to individual goals and company goals? And then the only thing I would add to what Nate walked through is being able to answer the question, how are you different and why does it, and how can you prove it? Because at the end of the day, there's always going to be competitors that are going to be claiming to influence the exact same drivers that you claim to influence. And so your buyer is just sitting there saying, just how are you different? How can you make me feel confident that those differences matter? If you can layer that on top of that and it's evolving, then you have a pretty strong deal.
I just got to add, Kyle raised such a good point there on how can you prove it? And that is also a piece of discovery. You need to be able to tie, if you're going to do some type of proof of concept or proof of value exercise, you need to tie every objection that you've heard to that one very specific point that you need to prove, because that is another thing that can draw out deal cycles, is a very kind of long and wandering proof of concept. So what is the one thing that ties in or summarizes all of their doubt because of what you've heard? And can you build or create a proof of concept that is different for that person because it is laser specific and focused on proving the thing that they don't have an answer for? So we hadn't talked about that point. So Kyle, I'm so glad that you brought it up, because especially in the context of an enterprise deal, I imagine a lot of people are having to prove it along the way.
Mm-hmm. So
good. we have like the most like, this is the mark of good discovery. You just hear some silence and some like, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we have some good like natural pauses in this session, because that is kind of the pace that you want in a discovery call. Is like, oh, well, that's an interesting thought. Let me think about that.
Makes sense. They come back with an objection right away, or they already have an answer. Then you haven't hit on that insight that got them thinking.
There you go.
That emotional intelligence element. Nick, or actually to anybody, I don't know, I'll just punt. Is there something on any of your minds that you want to ask each other? I know Nate and Kyle are sort of LinkedIn homies, so here we are on a live show. Like, do you want to ask each other something?
Yes. So
on the spot.
Yeah.
So here's my question for you, Kyle. When you have a rep who comes to you, and I'm putting you into the VP as opposed to the AE seat, which you live every day. When a brand new AE comes to you in a one-on-one and they're bringing something up, they're raising something, and you're like, wow, this person is going to be a star. Like, I can just tell they're going to have a very bright future. What are the signals that you look for in your meetings with, kind of one-on-ones with new AEs who just joined your team?
I'm looking for ownership. All the questions they ask and goals they set are through a lens of they will control their destiny. It's not about how are they going to receive the resources they need to succeed. It's how they're going to go make sure they get the resource they need to succeed. And if they don't, they'll make up for it somewhere else. But when I see a rep that clearly wants to learn and wants to take responsibility for their learning and has ownership of the outcomes, good or bad, that is an AE that I will bet on.
I like that. Ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Then the question I want to ask Nate is, how did you get so good at all of this stuff? Like your writing is so different than most of what I see on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Like, where are you drawing this knowledge from? Where'd you get this from?
So I don't read many sales books. Like I heard you mention the Qualified Sales Leader. I've heard all about it. Honestly, I've not read it. What I tend to do is I read a very wide kind of set or different types of genres. And then by analogy, I think about, okay, how does this apply to sales? Because I believe at the end of the day, you're working with humans, and good sales practices all are rooted in or based in an understanding of people. And so, man, I read everything from, actually, Morgan and I had a drink last week. He recommended a new book that's called Falling Upwards, more on the philosophical bent. And I've already started kind of thinking about it. Kind of breaks down the different stages of somebody's personal evolution. And I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. Can I begin to think about where people are in their stage of growth journey using this framework in a sales context? So I tend to learn and reason by analogy.
I did read The Obstacle is the Way based on your recommendation, Nate. And so now I am a philosopher. So if anybody wants to pick my brain on philosophy, I'm probably the guy for that.
That's awesome. I love that. And it's a good book.
A great book.
So I'm just kind of, stunned speechless for this power hour because somehow we're already at time, and it feels like it's been simultaneously not at all time, a lot of time. And I've also learned so much from you both. I know we all have here today. Our chat feeds have been exploding. So thank you to both of you for sharing your wisdom and your insights. And I'll just do the softball throw out. If people want to learn more, they want to get more of your deeply wisdom, where should they go?
Well, go for it, Kyle. Oh, look at this. Two gentlemen. I'll say for both of us, LinkedIn. Like that's how Kyle and I got connected, how I met Morgan, Nick, LinkedIn. So find us on LinkedIn. And then you can also check out, I write long form posts every 2 weeks that go out on our newsletter, fluent.io/blog.
Nice.
LinkedIn, I post most days, and then salesintroverts.com is where I post my paid content.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. And Nick, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, first, I just want to say thank you. I will definitely be listening to this at least 3 times and taking notes because there was just so many good bits in here. And so thank you guys so much for walking us through all of that. And I have to say, it's 2022. It's no longer acceptable for us to suffer in silence. So anyone, if you need help, you're struggling in sales, you don't have to buy anything from us. These are 2 great leaders in the space that you can reach out in the DMs and ask your questions or jump in the comments for support. You don't have to go at this alone. So get the help if you need it. And thank you so much for joining us. And we can't wait to see you on Friday. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.